I was invited to come here to give the keynote speech. I had another speech in mind, but I told what Kent did is he told me, look, in the States you don't go directly to the point, which is what you want to do. The first thing you do is you tell a story. So I've just seen gringos. They come here, they wave around, they talk around. They've met Paola, they met this guy at the port, they do that, and then they gradually come to the subject. So he said, tell a story. So I took one of the diagrams we use in my institute, we're here, and I'm going to explain. That Xi Jinping basically has done, and is doing in Latin America, is converting what sometimes you refer to your backyard into a Chinese front porch. It's true, and it's the following of Marx, and it is nothing else than the following debate that always existed since the Industrial Revolution between what Adam Smith said, Jefferson repeated, and Marx rose to give a different story. Now, the different story of Marx, of Karl Marx, we never really totally identified it because Stalin and Lenin took it over and converted it to a vertical dictatorship. But what Marx basically said is, if you want to actually produce surplus value, which is what the very brilliant James, our professor, said, you have got, if you want to do that, okay, you have got to base it in natural resources. And stop thinking about what Adam Smith and the others say, who pretend that there is value in two things. On the one hand, you have assets, and on the basis of assets, you issue money as if it were a different value. No, he said, capital only exists once. And if you've got the natural resources, you've got everything, which is the reason why now we in Peru, who actually produce most of the world's gold, together with Chile, 48% of export copper, which, by the way, is what, if the Chinese are appropriating it now, they've got most of the mines, etc., that means that your possibility of withdrawing Western Europe from the chokehold that Russia has on it, because it provides half of its energy needs, the fossil fuels, right, can be substituted by clean energy. And they're putting up their nuclear plants, and they're reviving them, and they're reviving their hydroelectric plants and eloic plants, but it doesn't flow through tubes. It flows through wire, and we got most of it. So if they get it, they'll eventually get Europe because they can choke it. And you will lose out on the Ukraine and everywhere else. Not only that, they're also investing in ports, which is a way of getting natural resources out and sharing them in broad markets. Plus, it also means that they own the waters, because both the ports and the water are also property rights. But in effect, the way we would call them in Latin America, they're sovereign rights. You can only get to them on a government-to-government basis. And let me tell you, the Chinese know how governments work, and they know how poor countries work, and you stop being a poor country. So you forgot a little bit of the different things that you did in the 19th century, which are absolutely brilliant and made your country rise from poverty. I mean, Washington, D.C., 200 years ago, who want to visit it? There's a swamp. Lima, ay. Buenos Aires, oh la la. Mexico City, of course. And look at you now, and look at us now. You did something right. And it's very important, because you're the world's major power, that you have to investigate why, if you've got all of this wisdom, you've got all of this scholarship, a country that has 1/10 the size of your capital markets, and has a GNP per capita 1/10 of what you do in the United States, is out-capitalizing you in your own backyard. So you've got to not only know what's good for you, you have to know why this power is gradually growing in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Latin America. We have a Marxist-Leninist president. It doesn't look like it. Don't forget, Lenin at the beginning spoke softly, and then he threw a bone at the capitalists. And that's what they're doing. They're telling you all sorts of nice things. Colombia, it's a Marxist-Leninist. Bolivia, one could be coming in disguise. Chileans are Marxists. Lula wants to convert Peru into the next Panama Canal, which is drying up, but we got the ports and we got the tunnels through the Andes, through which not only our exports and our minerals will go to China, but the Chinese will come in. And they're coming in droves. Not only because you're not around, because you don't know how to compete government to government, because government has got control over natural resources, but they're also, you will not be able to compete because the Chinese have followed your policies of putting up tariffs. And you actually gave Peru, President Trump has done it, a very low 10% tariff, which is way below the tariffs that are being imposed on China. So guess who's coming to Peru to take advantage of your 10%? The Chinese. In 1 year, they're going to be around and they're going to be exporting steel from Peru and the other countries. You come in and you decide that you're going to fight that off, Peruvians aren't going to like it, and then encroaching socialism. So you have to understand that it's very important to know Adam Smith, and the work of Professor Otteson is fantastic on that, but you also got to know who the enemy is, and the enemy is Marx. Why? Because what Xi Jinping did, and we have to study him because he's taking over the country, very softly, very quietly, not one warship inside, not one Chinese military. The way that he's doing it is he's developed a paradigm. And that paradigm is basically a sequence of how you take a natural resource, the ones that the brilliant and lovely Julian Simon talked about, how you convert it into capital, investment capital. Not money, which Marx called circulating capital. And so the way you do that, the way Adam Smith described it, tell me, Professor, if I'm right, he said you have to build a wagon way through the air. A wagon way through the air. How do you convert a wagon way through the air? Well, that's what your Fed does. That's what your Securities Exchange Commission talks about. You're supposed to take a natural resource, price it correctly, assert one property right after another, until at the end, like my passport, have I got it here? When I came through here to the United States, they said, who are you? I said, I'm Hernando de Soto. I'm Hernando de Soto. They said, no, show me your passport. I said, look, I'm Hernando de Soto. It's all here. Capital is all on paper. And so the question is, the Chinese, what they've developed is an algorithm pretty much close to what MacArthur did in Japan in 1940, starting 1946, and what blockchain is doing, interestingly enough. Not Bitcoin, blockchain. It's a sequence of information to take value from the asset all the way to circulate as money. It's obviously something that the world has struggled, and that's what, to me, is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was that those countries that industrialized and created prosperity were those that were able to, as Marx called it, not a wagon way through the air, but a transmutation from assets to liquidity. That. And interestingly enough, by the way, this is just anecdotal, I'm going to do what Kent says, you know, a good little story on the side. They all came from alchemy, who were all about how you transform ordinary things into gold. Now, we know in Peru that gold doesn't, you know, we're big exporters of gold, and we're poor. So it isn't the gold that makes you poor, it's what Professor said, what makes you poor is how you transmute. But there's two formulas, and formula number 2, which is Xi Jinping, which is a country that's got 1/10 of the capital, is churning out more investment capital than you are, because he says you cannot confuse money with investment capital. Investment capital has got to be rooted in the assets. And rooted in the assets means property rights. If the property rights system works, then you're able to generate the wealth. So once I'd absorbed everything that Kent told me about, I said, you know, if I give my speech, let me turn this around. First of all, I got to hear what Professor has to say. And then I got this drawing, because we Peruvians like drawing things, you know, on walls, like Mexico, very colorful sort of stuff. So here's the sort of stuff. Xi Jinping takes his formula directly from transmutation. And he calls it the independent knowledge system. Capital is about knowing your natural resources and who they belong to. Once you know that, okay, then you know how to decide how much money to print or what credit systems you have. For example, since I've been talking to some of your intelligence officers here, which I won't name because it would be very indiscreet, I said, when we titled Peru, we were the last country to beat a terrorist system without your help. Bang! The shining path. How do we do it? We gave them private property. All over Peru, we not only grew, we stopped doing it, unfortunately, but during 20 years, it went pretty well. But the reason we defeated it is because of the knowledge. The knowledge. Let me tell you how that works. I was in charge of that, which is why I am the most bombed guy in Peru. They gave me 500 kilos of dynamite over time because I discovered one very simple thing, which I got from Adam Smith, which was property gives you knowledge. He didn't say it in so many words. I've got Peruvian words, that's the people I talk to, or Latin Americans. How does that work? Well, if I get into guerrilla territory, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, or the Shining Path, I say, I've come here to title you. All right? No, I've come here, first of all, I'm government. Sorry, I got the wrong way around. I'm government. All right, what's your name? And then say you're called Mr. Parks. And you say, it's government. So you say, no, I'm Smith. Mm-hmm. All right, well, look, Mr. Smith, I've come here to title you. So what do I put in the title? Parks or Smith? The guy will tell you who his name is. Once you title everybody, you know where they're hiding out. You know where Al-Qaeda is. You know where the Islamic State is. You can deal with terrorism anywhere in the place because property forces you to tell the truth, like blockchain, right underneath their noses. Now, so what we've done is we've taken Marxist stuff and said, all right, how do they do their blockchain? Bing, 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 bing. And then we start saying they estimate the property, they do away with the blah, 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 blah. They distinguish fictitious property from investment capital. And because they're capable of looking at the costs and benefits of everything through a central state, which they say beats disorderly capitalism, which is the way they describe all your young men and women when they're out in the capital markets shouting, I bid so much for this, I bid so much for that. That's disorderly capitalism. You go on prices. We challenge that. You go on costs. And once you go on costs, it's a different story, and the Americans are not going to be able to do that. Why? Because they're full of antitrust laws and anti-collusion laws. They can't integrate vertically like we, the Chinese, can. And therefore, we can take Peru's resources and convert them into industry. Do you like that? And Peruvians and Colombians and Mexicans say, yes, that sounds terrific. Very good. Then I can come in. I'm going to take you from a natural resource all the way to the Industrial Revolution. Let's see now what's going to happen. Who is the rival of President Trump? Xi Jinping. Then you're talking to Marx, and you're talking to ideas. And the more you do what CEI is doing, and the work that Professor Artisan is doing, you will start getting places. Because as Martin Luther King said, it's not only that mankind make history, it's that history makes mankind. So you've got to go back 200 years to do the work of the classics and connect with development economics. You've got to connect. Why? Because we people from developing countries, or the poor of developing countries, constitute 80% of the world that is sitting on all the natural resources that you will need to preserve your civilization and to make it contagious. But you've got to get into our shoes. So let's go back to the proof. This is not more than 4 days old. I finished printing it before coming here to talk it over with some of the people I was going to meet in the States, and then we've put it on screen. That poster is Japan, 1946. And you've got at the bottom are the marginalized, the poor of Japan, who were conscripted into the armies to fight for territory. And MacArthur, who knew what was going to happen, and he was a Jeffersonian, said, I'm going to win that war. Very American thing. I'm going to win that war. We're going to make it, folks. Let's set up a think tank. And he did. It was called the Honolulu Think Tank, 1942 to 1945, headed by a man called Wolf Ledzinski. And he said, who are we fighting? He said, we're fighting feudalism. Why? There's poor in Japan. Japan at that time had half the GNP per capita that Peru did. It was a poor country, but a feudal country, which should concentrate capital in the right places, like the armed forces. And what happened is they had over 53 revolutions, like the Shining Path. They just weren't communists. And the Japanese government said, what we're going to do is we're going to get together with the industrial establishment, with the feudal establishment, and what we're going to do is get back what we lost in Manchuria and in Indonesia and all over the place. Let's go to war. On top of that, we're getting at the peasants, put them in uniform, arm them, and we put an order. So we have to destroy the feudal system. That was the brilliance of this Jeffersonian called MacArthur. So when he went in there, he said, now, how are you going to do it? We're going to send American bureaucrats? No. The Japanese know where they are. He put together a team of experts of Japan, and they drew up a plan on how to convert assets, which were feudal property, into capital, and found out that in the feudal system, there's a title that's a feudal title, which Marx clearly talks about, but in fact, it's composed of little property rights. You know, the De Sotos, the Smiths, the Clarks, and all these guys own little plots of land under a feudal lord. And they owned it for 400, 500 years. So what they decided to do, as you'll see 1, 2, 3 up, they said, let's map the place out. This will take, don't map the place out. Take the endo-generation titles of 400 years ago, and on the basis of them, we award property. Get photograph machines and get the people to stand in front of their little industries, their little steel plant, their little homesteads or whatever it is, and point to what they own. Click, gunpowder, poof, bang, bang. Those are the records. And they destroyed the Meiji Restoration and created the Tokibo Restoration. By that time, you guys were into another war in Korea and forgot to document it. And when we Peruvians said, hey, hold it, we're about to have a Japanese president. This is a moment to sink it in. Peru, Japan, and that's the way we titled. And we've titled 30 other countries. It is on the basis of MacArthur's regime, who was Adam Smith scholar and a Jeffersonian, and believed in this thing. And his orders on how you title Japan were in one page. He said, let the Japanese do it. When we then went to American records and said, let's find out how they engineered, no, all there is the Honolulu perception that they have to do it, and everything else is smudged out. It's very typical of, sorry, don't mean to insult anybody, but very much typical of United States declassification. Anybody can declassify, you smudge it out and smudge it out. You can't read history. How did Adam Smith really help develop Japan is not clear. And on top of that, the Japanese haven't documented. I mean, if you were smashed by 2 atomic bombs, you're no desire to go out and write about your history. You leave it on the side. So we Peruvians went there, International House of Japan, and said, how many of these guys are still living that did this, 1988? And we found out after you, there were 7 octogenarians. We sent a Peruvian team and said, okay, what the Americans aren't going to tell us, the Japanese will. We got that, translated it into property rights language, and now we're translating it into blockchain language until we hope to get an audience in the United States that realizes that you're not fighting China. It's Adam Smith fighting Karl Marx. It's the world of ideas. So it's great to be here with people who celebrate ideas, because this is an ideological war. It's not a military war. Once you do that, who you're fighting against and what you're fighting for, you will win. Then you got to stop saying, hey, how about exercising the Monroe Doctrine? Come on. Are we going to sympathize the fact that we're your backyard? Stop dreaming. Nobody's going to like it. Moreover, you don't touch South America. It's meant for Caribbean. That's your backyard. We South Americans aren't your backyard. And therefore, and on top of that, we have no prejudice against the Chinese. You know, the last 2 years, how many Chinese restaurants we've opened in Peru? 10,000. You can't win them on anti-Chinese. You got to beat them because they're Marxists. You got to beat them because they got a vertical government. You got to beat them because they don't have all the virtues that Kant talked about. All the faith there is in the individual as opposed to the collectivity. So, how do we illustrate this to everybody and explain also that this comes from this policy of changing everything into gold? How does capital work? And with this I will end. The way that capital works is also by stages of documentation. So we use the example of potential energy. The way we illustrate it to Peruvians, we have to use our own storytelling mechanisms, are these high lagoons in the Andes. It's potential energy, $0. But you drop it, gravitational energy. Then you translate it into kinetic energy. Then it is translated into something else, just like the way you try to transform to gold. And at the end, once you've done all of that, the water of Lake Junin has gone from $0 to $200 billion. That's value. I don't know if you understand how you document energy. I mean, have you ever touched energy? Have you ever seen energy? Have you seen what color it is? No, it's like capital. It exists here. It exists here. And that's a reason, supposedly, that Marx helped call it capital, because capital comes from Latin, head. You can only understand who your ideological enemy is if you get into his head. So you got to study Adam Smith. But for God's sake, study Marx too, because he's talking to you from China. He doesn't have a beard, and he's a very nice guy, and he's going to take over your backyard. Ideology. And that's what this institute that I love. And Julian Simon, who unfortunately just before he died, said, hey, let's write a book together, Hernando. Well, I don't write books together, but I was thrilled by it, and I'm thrilled for being a laureate. So, finally, Kent said, you know, you've given them a rough message, or at least what you believe in. Say something nice at the end, you know. So I said, I wrote a joke. No, that's very American. You start off with a joke and you end up with a joke. Doesn't work in the third world. This is a serious business conference, right? So here's about it. Why don't you substitute the Monroe Doctrine with, say, the Trump Doctrine? I mean, feed your leader's ego, the Trump Doctrine. And you can come in there and say, you know why they didn't like the fact that you said, I want Greenland? Because obviously, he's a real estate dealer. He was talking about superficial property. And of course, you buy and sell superficial property. But in every country except the United States, the underground property is not called mineral rights. That's why you have to connect with development policy. It's not called mineral rights, it's called sovereign property. You don't touch it, it's Peru, it's Chile. It's this kind of thing. So when your president comes around and says, hey, I'll take Greenland, he's thinking real estate deal. When he goes to Gaza and he says, hey, how about a beachfront? Everybody in the rest of the world gets shocked. But if you guys get serious about Adam Smith and Marx, you'll tell them, talk about the property rights. Don't tell them you're messing around with sovereignty, because the United States is the only place where what's underground can be transmuted, can become part of a market economy. Well, wait a second, Hernando. That was in the old days. MacArthur's not around, but I've talked to your military. They get this. Huh? They get it. But you talk about it, well, that doesn't work. Oh, what, it doesn't work? Of course it does. All your military forces are absolutely conscious of this. They're in Alaska Federation of Natives. Forget about our natives, you know, the Aztec Empire, the Inca Empire, very sophisticated people. These Eskimos, Inuits, and Aleutians were cutting holes in the ice fishing, shooting whales. Now they're one of the richest people among indigenous people in the world. Billionaires, because you've started giving them property rights. It's in your own backyard. And the only way this is going to be discovered is if you put intelligence to work. That's what CEI is doing. That's what you stand for, Professor. I commend your work. Start thinking about it, because this isn't military. It's about ideas. Thank you.